Welcome to the Power of Purity podcast, the show that empowers men to experience their sexual gift in a healthier way. Now here's your host, Tony Ingracia.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Power of Purity podcast, and thank you so much for being with me today. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to this episode. So I do pray that today's episode will be a great blessing and encouragement to you as you continue forward in your walk with God and your journey of purity before God. And I am very excited about today's episode and next week's episode. And I do believe that it will be a blessing to you because I have a very special guest. His name is Rob Kowalski. And Rob has written a book called Why Waiting Works. And the subtitle is How Fast Sex Prevents Us from Finding True Love and Long-Term Happiness. So it's a book about why we should do sex God's way, why we should wait until we get married to have sex. And so I think that's totally awesome. So let me start by just saying hi, Rob.
How's it going, Tony?
Just fine. Thank you so much for being here today and doing this interview. I'm really excited about it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
This concept of waiting until you get married to have sex. Are you kidding me? That is such an old-fashioned concept.
Right?
Probably most people that would hear this would immediately think, holy cow, these guys must be square. Like, you still believe you're supposed to wait till you get married? So I can't wait to hear more about your book. And, I'm 62 years old, and I decided a long time ago, I've been a believer in Christ 47 years now.
Wow.
And I figured out that God's way is way better than my way.
Always.
And when I try to do life my way, I'm pretty good at making a big mess. So even if God's ways seem kind of old-fashioned and out of date, I think God's pretty smart and God knows what he's doing. And if God said we should wait till we get married to have sex, I'm thinking God must have pretty good reasons for that.
You're right. And the thing is, no one was ever able to explain it to me. I had some exposure to the church as a kid. My grandmother was a Christian growing up. And I would go, sporadically, and they would tell you, don't have sex, but they would never tell you why.
Right.
And if you're hard-headed like me, you need somebody to explain it or you're not going to buy into it. And no one could ever do it. So, the book for me was a way for me to explain to people practically why it makes sense. Because I honestly believe that maybe no other human being in the history of the world has lived on such polar ends of the spectrum when it comes to sex as I have. And I'm not even kidding. I don't think there's anyone that has lived on more polar ends, because I had a lot of casual sex. I'm talking hundreds of casual encounters. And then I basically been abstinent for 15 of the last 20 years. And when you live on those two sides, it gives you a very unique perspective. So I'll get people disagree with me all the time when I tell them about waiting till marriage. And I'm like, look, I've done what you've done. You haven't done what I've done. So you're just giving me your opinion. So it started for me when my mom got pregnant with me young. She was, 14 when she got pregnant, raised me with an 8th grade education.
Wow, that's amazing, Rob. That's a baby having a baby.
It is. It really is. And there's challenges for single moms out there, and there's challenges for their children. And which is another, common sense reason to pump the brakes on the physical, because you're not only going to have to maybe pay child support for a child, but that child is going to have some challenges without a strong male role model in the house, not just, showing up on the weekends. So I didn't even have my dad on the weekends. He lived in another state. So I really didn't have any man around to really teach me this is what it means to be a man. So I kind of learned it from television and movies, and I just kind of ran the streets while my mom worked a couple jobs, and I raised myself. And I was girl crazy from a young age. So one day when I was 15, I walked into my apartment where me and my mom lived, and I found a videotape on the coffee table. I didn't know what it was. I popped it into the television, and all of a sudden on the TV were male strippers. And I remember looking at the screen and thinking to myself, that's what I want to be when I grow up.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I'm sure it was insecurity. It was this wanting to fit in. It was, thinking I'd be cool if I could get girls or whatever. So, when I was 19 years old, I became a male stripper. I started working for the entertainment agencies in Baltimore. Eventually, I was working for all of them. I was like in the phone book. I was the number one guy. I was working for a group that traveled around in like the tri-state area, and I was popular, and I was making a lot of money, and I had women came very easily to me. But I started to see the consequence of it in my relationships. So what would happen is every time is I would have sex with a woman quickly, and one of two things would happen every single time. Either I would immediately lose interest, or we would continue sleeping together and we would drift into a relationship, but it was never it was never that good. It always felt like something was missing. I would be looking over my shoulder wondering if I could be happier with someone else, but unable to break up with the person for some reason. And then my first girlfriend, we dated for 5 years. We were together for 5 years, and we were definitely not in love, but we had a soul tie, and I didn't even know what that was back then. I just knew I was kind of caught in something that I couldn't get out of. And when we did break up, we broke up on 2 occasions. Both times it threw me into a deep depression to the point where I pursued her to get her back. And but of course, again, I didn't know what any of this was back then.
Rob.
Yeah.
I've already got like 10 questions.
Okay, great.
So we're just going to talk, right?
Yeah, let's just do it.
I don't want to interrupt you too much, but
in there.
First of all, I don't necessarily want this to be a drunkalog. I don't want to glorify your sin. I'm absolutely fascinated by this testimony of you being a stripper, the number one stripper in the state of Maryland and in this tri-state area. So how did this work? Like, were you with a team of guys, 4, 5, 6 guys that would go out on the road and you would like do shows?
Yes.
Where women would come, 100, 200 women, and
exactly.
You're up on a stage? Or is this
exactly.
a private thing?
Both.
Where a bachelorette party hires you, a couple guys to come and strip at a party, a private thing? Like what's going on?
Sure. It's both. So you would travel around, to different bars and clubs and halls, like a local Chippendales type group, and you would do this on the weekdays. So you're talking like sometimes on the weekends, but typically it would be like on a Thursday night, maybe a Sunday night or whatever. And you would strip at these bars and clubs and halls. And during the weekends, you would work for the entertainment agencies, and women would hire you to come into their house and do bachelorette parties and birthday parties. And you would literally sometimes I would do 8 or 10 of them on a Saturday, literally start at 2:00 in the afternoon and not finish till 2:00 in the morning.
Holy cow. Yeah,
just one after the other. And I always treated it pretty much like it was a profession. Like, I kept it, for the most part, I tried to be, you were supposed to be a little bit untouchable. Like, you can't be dating the girls or sleeping with the girls, although that does happen. But I treated it like a job, which is probably why I was able to climb the ranks, where I showed up and I showed up one time and I kissed the agency's butts a little bit, the owners of the agencies. And I just, for whatever reason, I became the number one guy. And,
okay. I got another question. Did you probably saw the movie, The Full Monty?
Years ago. I actually saw Magic Mike more recently, and that's pretty true to how it was.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. In the Full Monty, that term means that they don't go down not just naked. To their underwear, but naked. They strip down. So when you talk about being a stripper, was it the Full Monty kind of deal?
Most of the time, women don't want that, to be honest. So, and I always explain that to people with stripping. It's like men and women are wired differently. Men, we want to make it, if you get a woman stripper, you want to make it as sexual as possible. For women, it's more like a novelty. You go there and they just want to laugh, and it's more of an embarrassment thing. Like they're giggling, and you go over and smack grandma on the butt, and everybody laughs. And that really is more what it's like. It's not that sexual, to be honest. Although some of the club shows can be, if you turn them into that. But usually that's not the case.
So would you meet women at these events, and women would like ask for your phone number, and you would hook up with women and stuff?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Or, a lot of times you would do shows, especially the private parties. A lot of times the shows would be in popular bars, and you would get off. You just got done taking your clothes off, and you have hundreds of women there, cheering for you. And then you get off and you put your clothes on and you hang out. And then, of course, it becomes very easy to pick up women.
Wow.
And when you're doing this day in and day out, weekend in and weekend out over the course of several years in a town that's really not that big like Baltimore, pretty much everybody knows you. A girl's seen you somewhere. So it becomes very easy because you become kind of become like a local celebrity. So, and if you don't have any reason to, any standards, and I didn't, because I didn't know the Lord in my 20s. So, it was just very easy to have as much casual sex as I wanted.
It sounds like it would be quite an ego trip, quite a head trip for a young, good-looking, muscular 20-year-old guy to have all these women fawning over him and cheering, and it must have been pretty heady stuff for a young guy.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's definitely a trap for sure.
And I'm amazed, I've met several guys, numerous guys in my life that have been just way, way out there on the end of the spectrum, as you say, literally hundreds of sex partners over the years.
Mm-hmm.
So most of these partners came out of this stripping career that you had? Is that how you would get most of these hookups?
Yeah. Well, so what happened was I transitioned being a stripper into being a club promoter, and that was like jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire, because it was just as bad, if not worse, because now you're like running a nightclub and you're the guy that is in control of who gets in, who doesn't get in, or who pays or doesn't get paid, pay to get in. So it's power. And women that go to bars and clubs typically don't have that strong of standards of purity, let's say, So you become this guy that's in power in a place where it just, again, it was very easy to have those opportunities.
I understand.
As often as you want it.
Right. And can I ask, and any questions I have, if you want to plead the fifth, it's fine.
Not at all.
I'm just trying to kind of get a sense. Was most of the stuff you were involved in like pretty much one-on-one, straight up heterosexual sex, or did it get even more crazy than that? Like into orgies and parties and scenes and all kinds of wife swapping stuff? I mean, it was the full meal deal. You were just into all the crazy stuff.
So it was always straight. I was never into anything, homosexual. Not to say there's anything twisted about that, if that's what you're into, although the Bible may say differently. For me, it was always straight. It was, sometimes it was more than, I had a lot of threesomes. Sometimes in my younger days, it was maybe me and another guy with a girl. So a lot of times it was, when I got older though, it was two girls. There would be orgies in that there were rooms of us having sex at the same time. Sometimes some swapping going on. This was before, this was like maybe when 25 years old or so, when I was into the clubs very heavily. Because there was a lot of drugs, a lot of ecstasy, a lot of something called GHB going around. But it was very debaucherous.
Okay.
To say the least.
So you're a young guy, early to mid-20s, all this crazy stuff going on. Did you have any sense of conscience at this point, Rob? Was God on your radar? Any sense of spirituality? Did you ever have a sense of conviction like, holy cow, this is pretty crazy. Maybe I shouldn't be living this way. What does God think of me? Like, was there any orientation of conscience at all?
No, not really. I love being me, to be honest. I loved the persona that I had created for myself. I looked in the mirror sometimes and I thought, how is this going to end? Sometimes, because I knew it was getting really out of control. Sometimes I really questioned why I would put, let's say there was a beautiful girl came into the club and I would, pursue her, get to know her, whatever, put in the work to sleep with her. And then the moment that I did, I would lose interest. And I questioned myself to go, why am I doing all this, putting all this energy into it? And then as soon as I get it, I don't even want it. So I questioned myself, and because it didn't fulfill me at all, yet I was enslaved to it.
Can I ask a question there?
Yeah.
I wonder if it was an issue of conquest. I mean, in your heart and mind and on your radar at the time, were you even thinking in terms of a committed relationship? Like, I hope someday to find a beautiful young lady, an awesome young lady, good heart, good character, to settle down and be committed to, and I'll have her, she'll have me, we'll be in a... You're not even looking for that. So basically, Basically, it's one night stand after one night stand. So why would you be satisfied? It's about the conquest. You see a beautiful woman, she becomes the target for the night. If you make the conquest, then it's almost like I'm picturing a metaphor right now. If you're golfing and they have these water jugs because it's hot outside, and these little triangular paper cups like a snow cone cup, and you get a little drink of water, and as soon as you drink it, you crush it and throw it away. It serves a purpose, and now it's done. Women become disposable. You get your drink, this one metaphorical drink, and then you throw her away, and then you're going to get the next one.
Exactly. And it did, I don't even think it intentionally started like that. I think I looked up to people that were playboys. My dad was a little bit of a playboy. But watching television and movies, you see people that are the men are playboys. So there was that. And I think I wanted that on some level, but I wasn't like, maybe I think I kind of hoped that I would fall in love, that there would be someone that I'd meet that would just blow me away and I wouldn't want to be without, but I'd never had it. I'd have sex, and the moment that I came, as literally sometimes I would lose interest in that girl. Not always, but I would say a very high percentage of the times. Sometimes a girl would keep my interest enough that we would, continue sleeping together and we would drift into a relationship, and those would be just train wrecks of relationships. But I had no really thought of God, to be honest. Well, you had asked that before. He didn't cross my mind. I didn't really feel necessarily guilty. I mean, my relationships were terrible. Fights, the girl crying, me wanting to be with her, wanting desperately. Like my first girlfriend, I said we were together for 5 years, and I cheated most of the way through it. I wanted to be in love with her. If I could have flipped a switch and made myself be in love with her, I would. She was a great person on paper, and I tried over and over to convince myself to be in love with her. I often say your head can't tell your heart how to feel, and you can't. It's either there or it's not. And if I could have made myself be in love with her, I would have. And I couldn't do it. And my second girlfriend, it was the same thing. We had sex quickly, drifted into a relationship, and she's a beautiful girl. She was sweet as all can be. But I could not make myself manifest these feelings of being in love, although I didn't want anybody else to have her either. And looking over my shoulder, wondering if I could be happier with someone else. And I didn't realize it, but it was the consequence of how I started all my relationships. What I grew to think, honestly, is by then I had thought, okay, I'm just the kind of guy that can't be monogamous. And I also had a belief that love didn't exist. I just thought, okay, you just find the person that hits the most of your points on your mental checklist, and you stay with that person. Nothing magical there at all. And I also thought, well, maybe human beings aren't supposed to be monogamous. And I had all these theories. All I knew is that for as many women as I'd slept with, and it was a lot, that I never had met one that I couldn't get enough of, that I would have wanted to stay with and be faithful to for the rest of my life. And I just thought, honestly, I thought it was one of those factors, or I thought there was something wrong with me. One day I heard God's voice. It was in March of 2000. And what he basically said to me was, if you start doing relationships my way, you'll be able to find true love.
Wow.
And it was the most radical realization of my life, because I never even considered that was the problem. That was the only qualifier we had, was, is she hot? Because I knew in my mind I was going to sleep with her. So I didn't even look at anything else. And then I would end up sleeping with them. And sometimes I'd end up in a relationship with them, but there'd be something missing. Well, of course it was missing. It was missing all along. It was missing long before you slept with her. You just didn't ask yourself.
Right. That's right. On my website, the Power of Purity website, I have a little video. It's just a cute little video that I did one time. I call it the toaster smash. And on this video, I present a metaphor, and I've got a big spike I need to nail into a piece of wood, but I don't have a sledgehammer. So I need to find something to compromise. So I find a toaster. It's a brand new little toaster. I take it out of the box and I start smashing. I said, maybe this toaster will work. And I start smashing on the nail. And what it does is it perpetrates severe damage upon the toaster. I smash the heck out of the thing,
Right.
And so I say, what's the point of the story? Obviously, I'm using this toaster in a way that was never, ever designed to be used.
Yep.
You know, if you looked at the manufacturer's instructions, nowhere in there would it suggest you can substitute this as a sledgehammer.
Right.
And if you do, it's going to damage the toaster. So in a way, that's what you were doing. You didn't even have an appropriate understanding of what relationship is and what love is, what commitment is. So you're using sex in ways that are totally inconsistent with the manufacturer's directions and instructions.
Yep.
So there's such a profound disorientation. It's like you really had no idea of what love is, what relationship is, what commitment is.
Yeah. No, I never really even seen a good relationship modeled until I think my mom met my stepdad when I was about 14 or 15, and they have a great marriage. But, that's pretty late in life to be figuring it out. And so, it gave me a tainted view and probably caused me to objectify women, a lot. I use them, honestly, like that toaster. I use them for my own selfish means. But it still didn't, like, God's no dummy. You don't get around any of this. Like, he set everything up in such a way that there's consequences when you take the shortcut. And, you're not able to find that person that fulfills you long term. And, I often challenge people when they push back on this. And I'm like, look, a lot of people don't want to get married right now. I don't know if you know the stats in this country, but there's a very high percentage of people that don't want to get married because they've seen their parents do it ass backward. They've seen so many people sleep together, drift into relationships, and then the marriage is a train wreck. And they're like, man, they think marriage is the problem. They're like, I don't want no part of that. I'm like, look, if I was to ask you, how would you like to find your best friend that you're physically attracted to long term, not just short term, that can help you reach your full potential in life? Would you like that? And every time people go, well, hell yeah.
That sounds pretty good, yeah.
Sounds pretty good. Well, don't have sex before marriage because it'll help you find her. It's that simple.
Wow.
Here's the deal. This is why it works so well. Because as bad as I want the pleasure of sex, and I want it pretty bad, I equally don't want the pain of a divorce. I don't want to go through the pain of a divorce. So you know what I do? I weigh. I see a pretty girl that maybe I'm like, ooh, I'd like to take her for a spin. But I'm like, would you sign the contract? Would you sign the marriage contract? And I'm like, no. Okay, move on. That's simple. One day a girl's going to come along and I'll say, yeah, I will sign it. And that's how I'll know that that's my wife. Because when I'm ready to go all in on one, that's how I'll know. It's that simple. And again, like why marriage works, again, because you look at the pain of a divorce, the statement I just made, the Bible says the heart is deceitful above all things. So your heart will trick you into believing something that's not true. So you give your flesh what it wants. It does it to us all the time. But when you introduce marriage into the conversation, it changes it. Because imagine if you're dating a girl and you said, hey, I love you. Let's have sex. And she says, I love you too, Tony. Let's just go to the justice of the peace real quick and get married. Now you're going to go, let me think about this a little longer, right? Because you're going to think, if I'm wrong, if my heart is lying to me, which you're going to check it now and find out if it is, this is going to cause me a lot of pain and discomfort. So now you're going to find out if it's lying before you get yourself into this very complicated dynamic that you may end up staying in your whole life. And I believe because soul ties are so strong, sometimes people can't get out of them. And they end up in 50-year plus marriages with the wrong person, waste their whole life because they wanted some tail. In the Bible where it talks about, let no one be sexually immoral or godless like Esau, who traded his birthright for a bowl of stew. The first time I read that verse, I thought, what does this have to do with sex? But if you think about the story of Jacob and Esau traded his birthright, something permanent, a blessing that would have lasted him his whole lifetime, for something temporary, a bowl of stew where he was hungry 3 hours later. That's what it's like with casual sex. You trade your soulmate and your purpose, because I believe when you pump the brakes, I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot here, but I want to get this thought out. This is what happened to me. When I stopped having sex, something called sex transmutation, it's a principle in the book Think and Grow Rich. I also write about it in my book, Why Waiting Works. That takes over. You harness that sexual energy. You dam that river, and now it's got to find another outlet. So now all of a sudden you start getting creative. You have all this time and energy to do things with that sexual energy besides have sex. So that's how I started the nonprofit, and I wrote the book, and I wrote my second book, and working on a third book now. And I just did a tour of the UK speaking. And I wasn't doing any of that when I was having sex. I was using all that energy and chasing women. So now I found my purpose. So when you stop having sex, you're able to put something called sex transmutation into effect. It's a principle I learned from a book called Think and Grow Rich. I actually write about it in my book too, Why Waiting Works. What Think and Grow Rich says is that sexual energy is the strongest of all human energies, and it can be used for other means besides physical expression. And you can, they say people of notable achievement throughout history, inventors and people that have amassed large fortunes, have been known to use their sexual energy to do it. And I know in my own life, I did this. When I stopped using it just to chase the opposite sex, I still had to do something with it. So I started my nonprofit, and then I wrote a book, and then I wrote a second book, and then I did a tour of the UK, and I just did some incredible things that I wasn't doing any of them when I was having sex outside of marriage. On top of that, now that I'm committed to waiting until my wedding night, I'm not having sex, is I'm able to evaluate the girls that I meet with a clear head.
Yes.
I'm not asking myself, am I just physically attracted to them? I'm asking myself all the hard questions. Now I'll know who to bring into this life that God's helped me to create to accomplish this vision that He showed me what I'm supposed to do with my life. That's how waiting works. You harness that energy, you figure out what your purpose is, you start your purpose, and now God brings you the woman to help you accomplish that purpose. If you look at Adam and Eve, Adam was doing stuff before Eve came in the picture. He named all the animals. God gave him a job before He gave him a woman. He gave him a purpose. And that's the order that I believe it happens. You harness the sexual energy, you figure out why you're here, you start that purpose, then when you meet the right woman, she helps you accomplish that purpose. She becomes your helpmate. Maybe you help her accomplish her purpose that she started when you weren't around. That's okay too. I don't know. I'm not against that at all. But I do believe there's an order to this, and we get so hung up on, I got to be with somebody, that we don't even give sex transmutation a time to work.
Wow. That's pretty powerful, Rob. Very fascinating and interesting. I can't help, I want to go backwards for a minute and ask a question that's been in my mind since we were talking about your story. Being so sexually active, were you in the habit of practicing what they would call safe sex?
I did and I didn't. I did pretty religiously when I was younger, and then as I got older, I got sloppy with it, meaning like I was probably 50-50 with it, to be honest.
So you weren't as careful as you could have been. I just was a little bit curious about that. Well, Rob, you have an absolutely amazing story, and let me see where to go from here, because I feel like we can go in so many different directions. Let me ask about the influence of pornography in your story.
Yeah.
They say that the average boy in America today finds porn when he's 11 years old. I think I found porn when I was 10 years old, and it had a profound influence upon me. I think one of the big mistakes that a lot of people make is they underestimate the significance of porn in a young boy's heart and soul. So was porn part of the equation for all of this crazy stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it was part. So when I was, I don't even know, 7 maybe, there was a magazine that we found in the neighborhood, and I remember looking at it. And there was also I want to say there was a magazine in my mother's apartment it was a Playgirl or a Playboy. I know there were some naked people in it. I don't remember. And another time, the apartment that I lived in with my mom, there were people in the room having sex I think they were in the same bed as I was, and they were having sex while I was laying in bed. And I didn't know what was going on, but I knew something was happening, and so I was exposed to all that at a very young age.
So no doubt that was part of the distorting, the twisting, the dysfunction around sex that was being embedded in your young heart.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Wow. And in addition, you found the tape of the male strippers, and that had a profound influence on you.
Yeah, by then I was already girl crazy. I didn't know why necessarily. And I had a female babysitter. She didn't molest me, but she was kissing all over me one time when I was a kid. So I'm sure all those things led to me getting to that point. Because from the time I hit puberty, I was girl crazy. Me and my male friends, I write about it in the book, is we would talk. That's all we talked about. From the time we were probably 13 or 14, is how we couldn't wait to sleep with girls, and we were going to have a contest to see who lost our virginity first. And these are my friends, the friends that I actually went to church with. These were like the guys, the boys that I went to church with. But we were just like, nobody explained it to us. And
right.
Even if they had, I don't know that I would have listened, to be honest. Back then, I don't know that I would have. I probably needed it to learn it myself the hard way.
Right. Unfortunately, it seems that that's the way many of us learn the deepest and most abiding lessons of our life, is the hard way,
Yeah.
Well, hey, Rob, thank you so much for being a guest. I see from the clock that we're out of time for this episode. I'd really like to invite you to come back next week so we can continue this fascinating interview and discussion. So can you do that?
Absolutely. I would love to.
Okay, great. So with that being said, you guys, it brings today's episode to a close. I'm going to let you go, and I'm sure that if you're like me, you're absolutely fascinated by Rob's story, by his testimony, by his journey, how God has worked in his heart and life. So I invite you to come back next week, and we will continue our interview with Rob Kowalski. In the meantime, I encourage you guys to check out his book, Why Waiting Works. It's on Amazon by Rob Kowalski. The subtitle is How Fast Sex Prevents Us from Finding True Love and Long-Term Happiness. So come back next week, guys. I'll look forward to seeing you then. Before I say goodbye, Rob, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to give your listeners a bonus. They can actually go get a free copy at whywaitingworks.net. And they just pay for shipping and handling. They get a bunch of other bonuses, like a study guide if they want to deal with a group of other men, or even group of men and women, and some other goodies. So check it out.
Wow, free. That sounds pretty good.
Yes.
And say the site again,
whywaitingworks.net.
.net. whywaitingworks.net. So if you want a copy of the book for free, check out Rob's book, check out his website, whywaitingworks.net, and we'll see you guys right back here next week. In the meantime, have a great day, have a great week, be blessed in Jesus' name. Bye-bye now.
Thanks for listening. Visit powerofpurity.org for more resources and information. And if this podcast has been helpful or encouraging, please invite a friend to listen. Until next time, remember, there's power in purity.